let's talk about something called emotional regulation. Now, I know it sounds kind of formal, but trust me, it's basically a superpower that we all have. It's the ability to not just feel our emotions, but to actually understand them and, guide them. I mean, have you ever had one of those moments where anger or sadness or just pure anxiety completely takes over and you feel like you're just a passenger along for a pretty wild ride? Yeah, we've all been there. And that's exactly what we're going to break down. So let's be super clear about this. Regulating your emotions doesn't mean you bottled them up or pretend they don't exist. Not at all. It's the skill of noticing what you're feeling and then, this is the key part, choosing how to respond instead of just reacting. It's about you being the guide for your feelings, not their prisoner.
To really get a handle on this, here's our game plan. First, we'll dive into what happens when those really big feelings take over. Then, we'll talk about navigating pressure and panic. After that, we'll explore how to bounce back from disappointment. And finally, we'll put it all together and build your very own emotional toolkit.
Okay, let's start with those super intense, in-the-moment feelings. You know the ones. They can make us act way before we even have a chance to think. We're talking about that hot flash of anger or that sinking wave of embarrassment. So, let's take a look at Ava's situation. A rumor starts flying on Snapchat, and her heart just starts pounding. Her mind is racing with anger and panic, and her very first instinct is to go find the person she thinks is responsible and just confront them. Right now, her feelings are in the driver's seat, and they are speeding towards a total collision. So the question becomes, what's a safer, calmer way to handle this? And you can see a really common pattern here on this slide. On the left, we've got Liam. He feels so embarrassed by a single comment on his artwork that he just destroys it. And on the right, there's Riley. He sees a hurtful message in a group chat, and his immediate reaction, type out a really angry, sarcastic text. They're both reacting to hurt. One turns it inward, destructively, and the other lashes out. And this right here, this is the core question that ties them all together. In those moments when you feel that sting of embarrassment or that rush of anger, how do you create just a little bit of space between the feeling and the action? How do you choose your response instead of letting an impulse choose for you? Now, it's not always a sudden explosion of anger. Sometimes the feelings are more like a slow burn of anxiety or that subtle but super powerful pressure to just go along with the crowd. Let's meet Ben. He totally studied for this test. But as soon as it starts, his mind goes completely blank. His hands get sweaty, his brain feels foggy. We've all been there. And as he sees everyone else just writing away, that pressure builds and builds until he just wants to give up. This is a perfect example of how the physical feeling of anxiety can literally hijack our thinking. So what can he do right there in that moment to break that cycle and get his focus back? And what about pressure from the outside? Look at Mia. She's in a classic situation where other students are making fun of a substitute teacher. She knows it's not right, but that desire to fit in is so strong, she just joins in. And that guilt she feels almost immediately, that shows the huge conflict between her actions and her own values. How could she have navigated that social pressure differently? Okay, so we've looked at those big, sudden emotions and that internal pressure. Now let's get into resilience. What happens when things just don't go our way and we're left staring down disappointment and frustration? As you can see here, we have two really different reactions to a setback. Max gets a grade he thinks is unfair, and his response is totally external. He slams his Chromebook shut and zones out. Juliana, on the other hand, she doesn't make the team, and her response is all internal. She just pretends she doesn't care, hiding how sad she really is. Both of them are struggling to process that feeling of disappointment. And disappointment doesn't always come from some huge failure. For Emma, it's just an unexpected change in her day. A fun project gets canceled for an assembly, and she just gets stuck. She's stuck in her frustration and refuses to adapt. It just goes to show that even small disruptions can feel massive if we aren't equipped to handle them. This question right here, this is the pivot point. This is where we stop just describing the problems and we start actively looking for solutions. It's not just about managing frustration, it's about transforming it into something productive. And that idea applies to every single scenario we've talked about. So let's do it. Let's take all those questions we've been asking and actually forge them into a practical set of tools. This is how we move from just reacting to our emotions to being proactive with them. And this is where it all comes together. Remember Riley, who was ready to fire off that angry text? His tool is to pause before you act. And for Ava, who was surrounded by rumors, her goal is to find a calmer way to respond. For Ben, frozen by that test anxiety, the key is to refocus your anxious thinking. For Emma, who was so frustrated by that change in plans, she needs to use flexibility. And for Max, who got that bad grade, the real challenge is to turn disappointment into learning. These 5 actions, they are the absolute core of your emotional toolkit. At the end of the day, emotional regulation isn't about numbing yourself or trying to wish your feelings away. Your feelings are just data. That's all they are. They tell you what's important to you. The real goal is to use that data wisely, to feel smarter, to make better choices, and to stay in control of your own story. And that brings me to my final thought for you today. As you go from here, just think about this. What is one feeling, maybe it's frustration or anxiety or disappointment, that you want to get smarter about? Because figuring that out, that's where the real work and the real growth truly begins.